She pushed the plate away, not with anger, quietly, the way someone pushes away something they have refused 100 times before. The women standing around her already knew. They had seen this before. They had seen this every time. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, the woman a king tore his entire kingdom apart to marry, and she would not eat. Not today, not most days. But here is what nobody outside that room ever knew. It was not about the food. It was never about the food. Before we go further, three things her servants saw that the rest of England never did. What she actually put in her mouth, in private, daily. What it was doing to her body over years. And one moment inside the Tower of London, so private, so so different from the Queen England thought it knew. Her ladies carried it in silence for the rest of their lives. All three, by the end of this video. Start where everything started. Spring, 1533. Anne is pregnant with her first child, and she cannot stop eating apples. Not one or two, not a normal amount. A violent, desperate craving, so intense that Henry himself joked about it in front of the entire court. Now stop. Think about what that moment actually meant. Everyone at court knew what a craving meant. Every ambassador, every courtier, every enemy she had made, and she had made many. They were all watching her appetite like a document, because this pregnancy was not personal, it was political. The entire reason Henry broke with Rome, the entire reason England split from the Catholic Church, was to get an annulment, so he could marry Anne, so she could give him a son. That craving for apples, that was not a pregnant woman wanting fruit. That was the justification for one of the biggest religious ruptures in history. Her ladies understood this completely. They stood close enough to see her hands shake slightly as she reached for another apple. They could not tell if it was hunger or nerves or something else entirely, and they said nothing about it to anyone. But here is what her servants had been watching long before the apple craving started. Anne ate strangely, not in a small way, in a way that unsettled the women closest to her. Some days, barely anything. Other days, sudden, desperate hunger. And in public, at the grand banquets, barely a bite. To understand what her servants were actually seeing, you need to understand who Anne was before she became queen. She had spent nearly a decade in France, at a court famous across Europe for one thing: restraint, small portions, elegant presentation, performed delicacy at the table. But here is something most people never think about. In the French court, small portions were not a choice, they were a weapon. A lady who ate with restraint signaled something powerful. She signaled that she was above appetite, above need, above the ordinary hunger that drove lesser people. Anne learned this when she was barely 15 years old. She practiced it every single day for a decade, until it stopped being a lesson. Anne became a mask. When Anne came back to England, the court noticed immediately. She ate less than English ladies were expected to. She had opinions about how food should be served. She lingered over dishes instead of devouring them. The older generation found it almost foreign, but Henry loved it. Her elegance at the table was a costume, carefully learned, deliberately worn. And here's the thing about costumes worn under enough pressure. They start to slip. Quick pause. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments right now. And tell me this, if you had been one of Anne's ladies watching all of this every single day, could you have kept that secret? Because what happened behind closed doors was something the court never saw. Picture this, 2 in the morning. The palace corridors are silent. Most of the court is asleep. But a kitchen boy is carrying a tray up the back stairs. Roasted meat, still warm, wrapped in cloth to muffle the smell. Not for a guest, for the queen. Anne Boleyn, who had barely touched her supper 6 hours earlier, was hungry, desperately, urgently hungry, and she could not let anyone official see it. Because hunger in a Tudor queen was not a private matter. It was information. Information that ambassadors would read, that rivals would use, that the court would interpret as weakness or desperation. So the tray came up the back stairs, quietly, in the dark, and her ladies sat with her while she ate, saying nothing. Because saying nothing was what they did. This was the real eating that no portrait ever captured, not the composed queen at the coronation banquet, not the elegant woman who waved away course after course in front of ambassadors. This, a woman eating cold meat in a dark room at 2 in the morning, because she had performed restraint all day, and her body could not hold out any longer. June 1533, the coronation banquet, Westminster Hall, hundreds of guests, course after course, parading before foreign ambassadors, sugar sculpture, swans dressed in their own feathers, wine flowing for hours, and at the center of all of it, Anne, magnificent, crowned, composed, eating almost nothing. The ladies standing behind her chair that day, they were not surprised. They had seen this before. In public, the costume held perfectly, small bites, composed expression, nothing wasted, nothing revealing. But they knew what was coming later. The tray, the back stairs, the dark room. The performance was for the ambassadors. The reality was for them alone. Now here is where the story takes a turn most people do not expect. Anne had a taster. Every meal that reached her table first passed through another person's mouth. Not because she requested it, because she was the queen. And queens in Tudor England did not eat food that had not been checked. The taster's job was simple. Eat a portion of every dish. Wait, if nothing happened, the queen could eat. But think about what that meant for the person doing the tasting. Every meal, every every dish, knowing that if someone had put something in that food, you would be the first to feel it. Not the queen, you. The taster sat at a small table near Anne's chamber. Her ladies watched this person work every single day. And here is what they noticed. The taster had learned to read Anne's moods. When the queen was eating well, the taster ate confidently. When the queen was sending plates back untouched, the taster sat longer, waited longer, because an untouched plate still had to be tasted, even if the queen never intended to eat it. That was the job. You tasted what was put in front of you, whether the queen wanted it or not. Anne's ladies watched this arrangement quietly. They understood what it meant. Every meal was a small act of trust built on fear, and fear was always present at that table. Here is where the story gets darker. That 1533 pregnancy produced Elizabeth, a healthy daughter, not the son the entire marriage had been built to guarantee. The disappointment settled over the household. Her ladies felt it in the smallest details. Meals sent back barely touched. Late-night requests for food that had nothing to do with hunger. A second pregnancy. Miscarriage. A third pregnancy. January 1536. Miscarriage again. On the very day Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was buried, the entire court read that as an omen. And Anne's body servant, the women who dressed her, who sat with her through the nights the official record calls indisposition, they watched her come apart in ways no ambassador ever reported. But here is what those women were seeing that no court physician named. The signs were in her body. Her gums were bleeding. Not dramatically, quietly, a little blood on the cloth when she wiped her mouth. Her ladies recognized it. In Tudor England, it had a name, scurvy, caused by months of erratic eating, by the weeks when she ate almost nothing, by the absence of the fresh foods her body needed to hold itself together. To the court, Anne appeared elegant, composed, controlled. To her ladies, the ones who handed her the cloth, who helped her rinse her mouth, who dressed the wounds carefully so nobody outside the room would notice, she was a woman in quiet physical agony. Chewing had become painful. Some dishes her ladies brought her were chosen specifically because they required no effort. Soft things, warm broths, foods that could be swallowed without pressure on the gums. The elaborate Tudor banquets were built around roasted meats, hard crust, dense pastries, things that required force. Anne could barely manage them, so she did not. And the court read her restraint as elegance, while her ladies quietly chose what to bring her and said nothing to anyone about why. Contemporary accounts describe her in these final years as increasingly thin, her composure sharper, more fragile. Some of her ladies later recalled, in fragments that survive only through secondhand retellings, that Anne would eat almost nothing for days, during the periods when Henry's coldness was at its worst. Then when his attention briefly warmed again, she would eat with a kind of frantic, relieved hunger. That unsettled the women serving her. Her appetite was tracking something. Her ladies knew exactly what. Now here's what most people do not know. We have a witness for what happened next. Sir William Kingston, Constable of the Tower of London. Not a friend, not a supporter, a career administrator. His job was custody, not comfort. He wrote letters to Thomas Cromwell, official letters, almost clinical. Precisely because they were official, historians consider them among the most reliable documents we have. Kingston recorded her moods, her words, her question, and he recorded when she ate and when she did not. Food brought to her chamber, sent back barely touched, dishes arriving and leaving without being opened. And then Kingston recorded something else, something her ladies would have witnessed in real time. Anne asking for eggs, poached eggs, soft, simple, easy to eat. Exactly the kind of food a woman with bleeding gums and months of near starvation behind her could actually manage. Her ladies knew why she asked for eggs. Kingston did not. He simply wrote it down. A queen in the Tower of London, days before her execution, requesting poached eggs. To Kingston, it was a detail in a report. To her ladies, it was something else entirely. It was Anne trying to eat, trying to keep going, trying to maintain something, even in that room, even with the verdict already decided. And then this, Anne asking whether she would feel much pain before her death, being told the executioner was very good, that there would be but a little pain, and laughing, a small, sharp, frightened laugh, right there in that chamber, witnessed by the ladies assigned to attend her. Not out of loyalty, by royal order. Several of them women she had every reason to distrust, placed there in part to report on everything she said. No privacy left, not even the illusion of it. Every meal delivered to that room was watched, every bite counted, every refusal noted. Because Kingston's letters make this clear, the refusals were frequent enough to mention to Cromwell at all. A queen who does not eat is not simply grieving. In the Tudor court, it could be read as guilt, as despair, as a woman already surrendering before the verdict came, which meant, even in those final days, even with her appetite nearly gone, Anne's ladies understood something terrible. How she was seen to eat was still being read as testimony. Think about that. She had spent her entire adult life mastering the performance of the table, the French elegance, the restrained portions, the composed smile. And now that same performance was being watched, not by admirers, by people searching her plate for evidence of her guilt. Her final morning, 19th May, 1536. We know exactly what she said on the scaffold. Multiple witnesses recorded it, careful, composed, praising the king, even as she walked toward the block. But what she ate that morning, whether her ladies managed to bring her anything, whether she sat with them and tried, whether she touched the eggs, none of it survives. One of the strangest silences in the entire story. We know precisely what she said publicly. We know almost nothing about the private hours before. The women who would have known, the ones who dressed her on the morning of the 19th, left no letters, no memoirs, nothing. That silence was not an accident. To speak about what a fallen queen ate in her final hours, at a court that had just executed her, was to invite the same scrutiny that had destroyed her. So they kept quiet, every single one of them, for the rest of their lives. Two names came down from that room. Anne Gainsford had served Anne since her days as a maid of honor, gave testimony decades later. Small details about the Queen's habits survived only because a Protestant writer recorded them, for completely different reasons. Margaret Shelton, Anne's cousin, served in her household, briefly caught in the dangerous currents of Henry's wandering attention, something Anne's own ladies watched with anxiety, not jealousy, survival. And then the ones whose names never survived at all, the women who dressed her on the morning of the 19th, whose hands would have been the last to offer her anything before she walked out to Tower Green. Those women left nothing. Their silence was not an accident. It was the only safe choice they had. A soldier's loyalty is tested once. In one moment, they hold or they break. These women were tested every morning, in every private meal watched, in every refused dish carried away, in every night witnessed and never described, for years. That is a different kind of courage. History gave it almost no credit. Here is what her servants were actually watching across those 7 years. Not a queen with a small appetite, not a woman with a French affectation. They were watching appetite as a political instrument. When Henry was close, she ate. When Henry pulled away, she stopped. When the pregnancies failed, the plates came back untouched. When the gums started bleeding, the dishes had to be chosen carefully. When the tower doors closed, the eggs came back uneaten. Her body was keeping score, meal by meal, quietly, in a language only her ladies could read. Anne Boleyn died on Tower Green, morning of the 19th of May, 1536. Not yet 30 years old, Queen of England for less than 3 years. In that brief, violent time, she reshaped the religious landscape of an entire nation, simply by existing at the center of Henry's obsession. And she did it while her body quietly tracked every moment of it, through hunger, through refusal, through desperate midnight trays, through bleeding gums and poached eggs and the small, frightened laugh. A about whether there would be much pain. Her ladies watched all of it, up close, in silence. We do not have Anne's own words about any of this. No diary, no private letters. What we have is what was accidentally preserved. Chapuis, hostile, recording her craving almost as a joke. Kingston, clinical, reporting to Cromwell on a prisoner. The kitchen accounts that noted quantities without emotion. The later chroniclers whose agendas historians now treat with care. From those pieces, partial, filtered, assembled across 4 centuries, this picture gets reconstructed, not complete, not certain in every detail, but real in the way that matters. A woman whose hunger and its absence track the slow collapse of her world, visible only to the women standing close enough to notice, and disciplined enough never to say so. Both things were true at the same time. The queen the ambassadors described, composed, dangerous, impossible to read, and the woman her ladies dressed every morning, the woman who ate in the dark at 2 in the morning, the woman whose gums bled quietly behind the composed smile, the woman who asked for poached eggs in the Tower, the woman whose final morning breakfast, if she managed to eat anything at all, nobody thought worth writing down. Same person, same body, same days. There is something worth carrying from this story. It has nothing to do with the 1530s. Every era builds its own version of the performance Anne was trained to give. The composed smile held in place for a watching audience, while something far messier happens in private. We think that pressure is modern, born of cameras and comment section. Anne's story says otherwise. 400 years before any of that, a woman was already performing at every meal, already being read for signs, already relying on a handful of people to manage what the audience could and could not see. The tools change, the performance does not. What stays the same, across every century, every court, every era, is the gap between what is seen and what is known, and the quiet discipline of the people closest to us, who choose to keep that gap closed. Anne's ladies kept it closed for 7 years, then for the rest of their lives afterward. That is what service to a Tudor queen actually cost. Not one dramatic moment of sacrifice, just the daily decision, made every morning in a private room, to see everything and say nothing. Did you know about the poached eggs? Did you know about the midnight trays? Or is this the first time you have heard what her servants actually witnessed? Drop a comment. Tell me what surprised you most, and tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. If this changed how you see Anne Boleyn, share it with someone who thinks they already know her story. Subscribe, because next week we are going somewhere else. Somewhere official history decided not to look too closely. That video is already waiting.